There were mornings when I woke up feeling like a weight had settled right on my chest, heavy, suffocating, and completely without reason. It wasn't a cold or a pain I could explain with my body. It was something deep inside, a restless storm brewing where calm should have been. I would lie there, heart beating erratically, breath shallow, and the world outside still silence. It was as if an invisible force had taken hold of me before my mind had even opened its eyes fully. I always brushed it off. It's just stress, I thought. Or, I'm overreacting again. But that feeling never really faded by itself. It crept back, day after day, sometimes worse, sometimes just a whisper beneath everything else I was trying to do. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee, wondering why such dread could be so loud when there was nothing to justify it. The buzzing in my head made even the smallest tasks feel monumental, and the idea of facing the day felt like climbing a mountain with no end in sight. At first, I felt weak for being trapped in that state, like I should just shake it off, be stronger, or stop worrying so much. I knew other people got on with their lives without this invisible burden pressing down on them. It was isolating, like carrying a secret no one else could see or understand. Some days, I even questioned whether I was just making excuses to avoid something more important, or if I was broken in some way no one wanted to admit out loud. But as that feeling lingered, I started to realize that this wasn't a sign of failure or weakness. It was a challenge, one that was happening inside my own mind and body. I was facing an internal battle, a force that tried to convince me I was in danger, even when there was none. Twice in a row, I found myself freezing in the middle of conversations, breathless and overwhelmed, unsure why my body reacted the way it did. I wasn't losing control. My mind was trying so hard to protect me, but it was steering me wrong. At some point, I knew I couldn't just go on like this. Something had to change. The problem wasn't just the fear itself, but how it dictated my every waking moment, how it hijacked my thoughts and made my heartbeat a warning signal rather than a rhythm of life. I didn't want to spend my days reacting to shadows and what-ifs. I wanted to reclaim my sense of peace and clarity. But I also realized I couldn't just will myself out of it, and that scared me. What I found most confusing was the subtlety of it all. You don't always notice when anxiety is crawling inside. Sometimes it begins with a small thought, a flicker at the back of your mind, or a particular habit that sets it off. And before you know it, that chain reaction spins you into a spiral that's hard to pull yourself out of. It's tricky because it doesn't come with flashing signs. There's no loud alarm before the storm hits, just this quiet, overwhelming pressure that seems to tighten invisibly around your chest. I also discovered that this struggle was shared by so many others, though not always talked about openly. People I admired, close friends, even strangers online talked about waking up feeling a weight on the chest, a heaviness that colors their day with uncertainty and dread. They, too, wrestled with a silent battle that wasn't just about being afraid, but about managing that fear before it took over completely. So I made a decision. I wanted to understand it better, to know the signs and the hidden triggers, to stop letting automatic thoughts control me. I wanted tools that gave me back some control over my own mind. It was going to be a journey, probably slow, sometimes painful, but it was necessary. Because the longer I ignored it, the more the fear grew, occupying spaces that should have been reserved for joy and calm. This is why I'm sharing what I've learned. Because anxiety shows up in ways we don't always expect, and it can rule us quietly before we even notice. It's not about instantly erasing fear, but recognizing its hold and starting to reclaim ourselves step by step. This journey isn't about denying what we feel. It's about facing it with courage and gaining the clarity to live fully again. I know it's hard to admit these feelings. I know it can be tempting to hide or dismiss them. But what if we didn't have to fight alone? What if understanding the battle we face in our minds could light the first spark toward freedom? That's where we begin, looking squarely at that heaviness we wake up to, recognizing it without judgment, and preparing ourselves to shift, heal, and grow. If you've ever felt that silent weight pressing down when everything else still feels uncertain, you're not alone. And as we move forward together, I want you to know this isn't a story of weakness. It's the start of a hero's journey. One where you reclaim your peace and step into the power that's been quietly waiting inside you all along. There was a moment I remember vividly, standing in the middle of a bustling street, the noise swirling around me like a chaotic symphony, yet inside I felt frozen, as though encased in glass. My chest tightened inexplicably, and my thoughts became tangled in a relentless loop of what if. It was as if my mind had a mischievous puppet master, pulling strings that stirred shadows where there were none. This wasn't mere nervousness. It was a force that distorted reality, turning ordinary scenes into daunting landscapes. I recall how strangers passed by, oblivious to my inner turmoil, leaving me isolated amid the crowd, unsure if I'd ever regain my sense of ease. This experience revealed a hidden choreography between my mind and body, a dance more intricate than I initially realized. Rather than a single moment of panic, anxiety often unfolds as a sequence of subtle signals. At first, it might whisper with a fleeting tension in my shoulders or a subtle clench in my jaw. These physical clues were like markers on a map, guiding me toward recognizing the onset of unease. They spoke without words, telling stories about unspoken fears and unresolved thoughts lingering beneath the surface. Recognizing this somatic language was like deciphering a secret code that my nervous system had been sending all along, unanswered and unnoticed. In one particular afternoon, I experimented with simply observing these bodily sensations instead of reacting to them. Sitting quietly, I tuned in to the tiny fluctuations in my heartbeat, the slight coolness of my palms, the way my breath hesitated. This was no easy feat. My mind habitually sought to escape discomfort through distraction or resistance. However, surrendering to awareness opened an unexpected doorway. This act created a gentle pause, a space where the whirlwind slowed enough for me to witness the anxieties unfolding instead of letting it consume me. It felt like stepping back on a theater stage to see the actors up close, no longer caught in the play, but an observer with clarity. Surprisingly, this modest shift in perspective revealed a deeper layer. The mind's habit of painting worst-case scenarios before reality presented any facts. I noticed how imagination could spiral rapidly, creating vivid, daunting images and stories without any grounding evidence. This automatic forecasting of catastrophe felt like an overzealous sentry flooding alert signals in the absence of true danger. At times, it was exhausting to catch myself mid-thought, realizing I had constructed a labyrinth of fears from fragile wisps of assumption. It was a humbling lesson in how much my mind craved certainty and control, even if it meant fabricating threats to justify that desire. An episode that stands out involved me preparing for a routine presentation. As the time neared, an avalanche of what-if questions cascaded through my head. What if I forget my words? What if they don't understand me? What if I embarrass myself? In those moments, my body stiffened and my breath became shallow. I realized that anxiety wasn't simply a reaction to upcoming events. It was deeply interwoven with how I anticipated outcomes, coloring future moments with shades of dread. Understanding this unraveled a thread I could pull. If I altered how I related to those anticipations, I could ease the physical and emotional charge accompanying them. It was as if rewiring my expectations could dampen the storm before it escalated. One technique that transformed my approach involved redirecting my focus to tangible, present experiences rather than mental forecasts. I would anchor myself with concrete sensations, the texture of fabric beneath my fingers, the rhythm of my breath entering and leaving, the hum of distant activity. This sensory grounding acted like a lifeline, tethering me to reality instead of the swirling what-ifs. Gradually, the overwhelming narratives lost their grip, replaced by moments of clarity cultivated through intention. Practicing this during smaller anxieties built resilience to face larger waves without surrendering to them. Yet, beneath these practices, a more profound truth gradually emerged. Anxiety did not arise in isolation, but was a response shaped by my body's survival mechanisms. The primitive parts of my brain, wired to detect threats, often overreacted in benign situations. Recognizing this neurobiological foundation didn't diminish the hardship but reframed it. It was not a personal flaw or weakness, but an ancient system misfiring in a modern world. This understanding sparked compassion toward myself, shifting the narrative from self-blame to care and curiosity. Reflecting on these experiences, I began to view anxiety not as an adversary to defeat, but as a messenger carrying signals about my internal landscape. Each spike of tension, each racing thought was a call for attention, not punishment. Listening to these messages with kindness allowed me to respond differently, offering patience instead of resistance. This subtle realignment changed how I navigated daily stressors and moments of uncertainty, imbuing me with a sense of agency even amid discomfort. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter your own moments of unease. Perhaps in the rush of decisions or the quiet before a phone call, your body whispers clues that often go unheard. What might happen if you slowed down long enough to translate these signals, acknowledging physical tensions, tracing thought patterns detached from facts, and gently steering yourself back to palpable reality? This path isn't about immediate eradication of anxiety. It's about cultivating a loving conversation with yourself that transforms fear's hold into understanding and balance. On one humid summer afternoon, I found myself sitting on the park bench, trying to catch my breath as a sudden surge of restlessness raced through my veins. It wasn't triggered by some glaring external threat. Instead, it stemmed from an overwhelming internal dialogue that amplified a vague sense of urgency. My mind spun scenarios, weaving a tapestry of impending doom, each thread more tangled than the last. In the midst of this mental clamor, my gaze fixed on a single leaf fluttering against the sunlight, its delicate oscillation offering a stark contrast to the turbulence within. That moment cracked open a new understanding for me. Anxiety often thrives on the illusion of urgency where none truly exists. The internal chorus of what-ifs and should-haves operates like a relentless tide, pulling us farther away from the shore of calm. I discovered that my mind could exaggerate the significance of small stressors, transforming innocuous events into colossal challenges overnight. This amplifying effect acts as fuel to the fire, stoking a fear of invisible enemies and unknown consequences. One afternoon, grappling with a deadline at work, I noticed how a minor email oversight ballooned into full-blown panic within minutes, as though my very competence hung in the balance. This tendency to magnify uncertainty creates a feedback loop, making it difficult to interrupt the rushing current once caught in its pull. At one point, I began to wonder about the silent architects constructing these anxious narratives inside my head. I realized that past experiences, even those I had long dismissed, had embedded themselves like shadows coloring my expectations. Childhood lessons about never making mistakes or being judged harshly morphed into internal monitors that magnified pressure and stifled self-compassion. These subtle yet tenacious imprints formed an undercurrent, fueling my anxiety in moments that seemed unrelated on the surface. Attempting to outrun this influence only deepened its grip, as my reactions became increasingly automatic and instinctual. It wasn't until I intentionally slowed down and observed this mental architecture without judgment that I glimpsed the fragile wiring beneath it. I imagined it as an intricate web of mirrors, each reflection distorting reality in differing and sometimes contradictory ways. This metaphor gave me the courage to confront not just the symptoms, but the foundational beliefs shaping my responses to everyday challenges. Facing these internal voices required tenderness. Harsh resistance would have only sent me spiraling into frustration and despair. Instead, I chose to become a curious explorer, tracing the origins of my anxious thoughts without a desire to eliminate them instantly. One evening, ensnared in this reflective work, I wrote a letter, not to anyone else, but to my own anxiety. I acknowledged its role as an overprotective guardian, misguided but earnest in its efforts to keep me safe. This act of naming and personifying allowed me a new perspective, shifting the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative. I could now interview my anxiety with questions like, what exactly are you afraid will happen? And how else might you fulfill your role without overwhelming me? This dialogue never promised immediate peace, but it fostered a foundation of respect and mutual understanding that softened its intensity. Alongside this internal questioning, I began introducing new rituals designed to recalibrate my nervous system's response patterns. Simple practices such as intentional pauses between tasks, mindful listening to ambient sounds, or stretching with full attention gradually rewired my automatic reactions. One particular technique involved visualizing anxiety as a passing storm cloud, sometimes dark and heavy, but inevitably moving across the sky to reveal sunlight beyond. Whenever tension arose, I would immerse myself in this image, reminding myself that no emotional state was permanent. This became a beacon, drawing me out of the quicksand of rumination and into the open expanse of possibility. Gradually, I noticed that the moments of peace expanded their territory as anxiety's dominion shrank. There was a subtle empowerment in acknowledging my capacity to tolerate discomfort, to coexist with uncertainty without surrendering to it. In practical terms, this translated into making deliberate choices. I started saying no to activities that exacerbated tension, carving space for rest and reflection. I cultivated environments, like quiet corners at home or gentle nature walks, that invited calm to settle naturally. These intentional boundaries worked like protective walls, buffering me against the relentless assault of racing thoughts and volatile emotions. Now, consider how this applies when you face your own internal storms. When the spiral of anxious fantasies begins to build, try pausing to scrutinize your mental projections and their origins. Are you perhaps caught in a story fueled by echoes from the past rather than present reality? Allow yourself to dialogue with your mind, honoring its intentions while guiding it toward constructive expressions. Introducing small, grounding rituals that contest the reflex to panic can shift momentum, even if only slightly at first. Understand that these steps collectively write a new narrative, one that doesn't erase anxiety instantly, but transforms your relationship with it into one of growing mastery and gentleness. I remember a day when anxiety took on a new shape, a quiet, creeping fog that settled over my mind so subtly I almost missed it. I was preparing to meet someone important, and instead of the usual racing thoughts, I experienced an unsettling sense of disconnection, as if my mind was retreating into a distant room. My muscles softened, my breath slowed unnaturally, and a fog of numbness wrapped itself around my thoughts. It was a strange departure from the spikes of panic I knew. This was a whispered lullaby of avoidance, a different shadow anxiety cast. I came to understand that anxiety doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hides behind lethargy and withdrawal, masking itself as calm while quietly eroding my energy and motivation. On that afternoon, walking through a crowded cafe, I noticed my gaze slipping over people like a drifting cloud, my body present but my spirit disconnected. A sudden sadness crept in, a recognition that anxiety might not only shake me with alarms, but could also smother me softly, draining my capacity to engage with life. This realization led me down a new path. How often anxiety disguises itself as apathy or fatigue, lulling us into false security while still tightening its grip. I began to pay attention to those moments when my body slowed excessively or my mind drifted, recognizing them as subtle alerts rather than signs of rest. Later that week, I met with a friend who asked how I'd been doing. Instead of the usual rehearsed fine, I told her about these foggy episodes and the weight of resistance that hid beneath my skin. She shared her own experience, which involved a strange urge to isolate and ignore responsibilities whenever her anxiety deepened. Her story helped me see that anxiety's shape-shifting nature often traps us in cycles of avoidance, postponing what matters because the act of facing it triggers discomfort we're unwilling to endure. Understanding this, I felt a renewed tenderness for myself. I wasn't simply lazy or weak. I was reacting to a peril only my mind perceived, which had learned to seek safety in stillness and retreat. These insights pushed me to explore how movement, both physical and metaphorical, could fracture the fog's hold. I began incorporating tiny, deliberate actions into moments of numbness, shaking my hands, stretching my arms above my head, or stepping outside for a breath of air. Each movement became a crack in the sedimentary rock of emotional inertia, allowing sunlight to seep through. On one morning, after lingering in bed longer than usual, I forced myself to open the window and noticed how the fresh breeze seemed to stir not only the curtains, but also something dormant inside me. That single act sparked an upward spiral. The physical sensation of air against my skin became a foothold for emerging from emotional paralysis. Around that time, I stumbled into journaling as an unexpected ally. Unlike my racing thoughts, Writing invited structure and pacing. I used short bursts of words to capture moods and streams of consciousness, without forcing coherence or resolution. One entry read, "Today my mind is like a muted radio, broadcasting whispers I can almost hear but can't quite grasp." This metaphor helped me acknowledge the muted intensity of foggy anxiety, granting me permission to feel lost sometimes without judgment. Writing became a bridge from confusion to clarity, transforming vague sensations into named experiences, and that alone lessened their power to unsettle me. Simultaneously, I experimented with embracing paradoxes that anxiety presented. How could both an overwhelming restlessness and paralytic numbness be manifestations of the same internal battle? I started to view my responses as attempts to protect, each in its own way. On days when energy cratered, I accepted that pushing harder would only deepen exhaustion. Instead, I chose to lean into gentle self-care, heat packs for tense shoulders, quiet music in the evening, or nourishing meals slowly eaten. I saw these acts not as indulgence, but as essential repairs to a system under siege. Gradually, these mindful choices formed a repertoire of self-tending actions that softened anxiety's intensity without demanding immediate eradication. One incident stands out. During a particularly challenging week at work, anxiety descended in waves of fatigue and low mood. Recognizing so, I allowed myself to take shortened days and admit I wasn't at my peak. I told my manager honestly, and to my surprise, found understanding rather than judgment. This experience redefined my relationship not just to anxiety, but to vulnerability and honesty. Embracing my limits didn't diminish my worth. Instead, it revealed resilience in seeking balance rather than perfection. Reflecting on these moments, I see how anxiety can manifest in intricate patterns, not always loud alarms, but subtle whispers that distort our presence and capacity to act. Sometimes it clouds the mind with fatigue, robbing joy of its colors. Other times, it compels withdrawal, pressing us into silence instead of connection. Each manifestation invites a unique response. Movement where stagnation reigns, tenderness where judgment arises, expression where thoughts thicken into fog. These layers deepen my understanding of anxiety's complexity and shape a more compassionate roadmap forward. If you find yourself weighed down not only by fear, but also by inexplicable tiredness or a craving to disconnect, remember these subtle signs call for gentle awareness, not dismissal. Taking small, intentional steps toward re-engagement can dissolve the fog piece by piece. Through actions as modest as opening a window or jotting down free-form thoughts, you can rekindle the spark of presence and reclaim the rhythms stolen by silent anxiety's embrace. In the stillness of a quiet morning, I found myself pacing the room, heart flickering unevenly like a candle caught in a draft. This undertow beneath my surface wasn't a sudden surge but a slow, insidious tightening, a sensation tethered not to immediate worries but to an unspoken anticipation. I realized I had been overlooking a dimension of anxiety rarely spoken about, its ability to rewrite time itself. The present became flattened, stretched, or distorted by a persistent focus on future dangers that seemed to loom, not as distant specters, but as pressing realities demanding constant attention. One afternoon, I sat across from an old friend who confessed how their mind often replayed scenarios endlessly in a cinematic loop, hunting for flaws or alternate endings. This reenactment wasn't merely memory. It was a rehearsal of potential missteps shadowed by self-doubt. Listening to their words, I saw parallels within my own experience, how episodes of worry transform into internal dramas with actors I have come to know intimately. Fear of failure, voices of criticism, whispers of inadequacy. This realization shifted my understanding from viewing anxious moments as fragmented flashes to recognizing them as narratives constructed with intent, fueling the intensity of discomfort. Exploring this narrative lens led me to deliberately rewrite my internal scripts. I experimented with the practice of envisioning alternative story arcs, a mental exercise where I imagined new outcomes, gentler responses, and hopeful resolutions replacing automatic catastrophes. It felt as if I were handing myself a fresh script, one not bound by the strict directives of past fears. Like a playwright editing lines mid-performance, This shift created space where anxiety's rigid script loosened, making room for unexpected grace and resilience to emerge. Another striking encounter came from observing how my body seemingly rehearsed for battles yet unseen. Moments of jitteriness, shallow breaths, or a churning stomach appeared not only as reactions, but as anticipatory rehearsals, my physiology pre-encoding tension before challenges even arrived. This insight reframed anxiety as an embodied storyteller working relentlessly, preparing me for scenarios that never fully came into being. Recognizing this dynamic introduced compassion toward the biology involved, as well as curiosity about how I might recalibrate these responses through intentional physical practices. Driven by this curiosity, I sought out movement forms that broke the pattern of containment anxiety enforced. Dance, martial arts, even simple stretching became modalities through which I could interrupt the muscle memory of tightness and constriction. I recall a session when I allowed my body to sway freely in a sunlit room, surrendering to rhythms unplanned and unrehearsed. These moments were transformative, not because they extinguished unease instantly, but because they rewrote the language my body used to communicate fear, replacing rigidity with fluidity and experiencing space as freedom rather than threat. Simultaneously, I uncovered something profoundly therapeutic in the act of storytelling aloud. Speaking fears out to a trusted companion created a different texture to them, externalized, less menacing, accessible to questioning and reframing. During one nighttime conversation, sharing imagined catastrophes softened their grip, as if daylight was filtering into a dark cavern. This verbal improvisation blurred the line between internal and external worlds, reminding me that these fears had origins but were not immutable truths. One evening, I noticed how certain sensory experiences acted as catalysts for release. The crisp scent of pine during a forest walk, the tactile sensation of cool water running over my hands, or the smooth curve of stones beneath my fingertips became anchors pulling me out of spiraling worries. These encounters tethered me to the immediate and tangible, disrupting the looping stories that so often ensnared my mind. Over time, cultivating attentiveness to such sensory cues formed a mosaic of grounding points that empowered me to reclaim presence amidst internal storms. I also discovered that vulnerability carried a paradoxical strength. Admitting moments of inner chaos to myself and close others was not surrender, but an act of bravery. I recounted a private conversation where confessing my fears invited empathy instead of dismissal, shattering the illusion that I must bear anxiety in isolation. This experience knitted a new fabric of connection, illustrating how sharing could dilute the density of distress and instill hope through relational nourishment. Now, consider how this applies when you confront your own unfolding scenarios of tension. Think of the scripts your mind defaults to, how rigid or expansive they are, and imagine the possibility of authoring new narratives in your day-to-day reflections. Notice what stories your body might be rehearsing before you take the stage of your daily life. What small movements could send fresh signals through your muscles and joints, inviting release instead of holding? Could sensory moments become secret doors back to stillness? And what might open by inviting trusted voices into your lived experience? This exploration reveals that the realm of anxiety is not solely a battle against intrusive emotions, but a complex interplay of time, story, body, and connection. By tuning into these dimensions, we can begin to unravel its threads and weave new tapestries that honor our vulnerability while celebrating our capacity for transformation. I sat quietly in my dimly lit room one evening, the hum of the city fading into the background as thoughts raced relentlessly through my mind. Yet, intertwined among the spirals of worry was a peculiar sensation I didn't expect, a nagging sense of disconnection from my own feelings. It was as if my emotional palette had dulled, colors fading into a grayscale expanse. For months, I had chased relief by focusing solely on identifying triggers or deploying distraction tactics. But that night, I realized I'd overlooked a profound piece of the puzzle: the way my anxious mind distanced me from experiencing the full spectrum of emotions, including those that bring joy and vitality. A turning point dawned when I reflected on past moments of joy, recalling the laughter shared with close friends or the simple delight of a sun-warmed afternoon. Yet, In my present state, these memories felt muted, like echoes from a distant shore. That disconnection was not a sign I was broken, but an unrecognized side effect of the tension I carried daily. I began to understand how persistent inner unrest can lead to a protective veil, dampening sensations and emotions to shield from overwhelm, but inadvertently dulling life itself. Accepting this, I sensed an invitation to reconnect, not by silencing my fears, but by welcoming the full range of feeling, even those once buried. One morning, compelled by this insight, I geared up for a walk through a familiar nearby park known for its vibrant wildflowers and winding pathways. As the light sifted through the canopy, I decided to practice simply noticing sensations, how the cool breeze brushed my skin, how the earth felt solid beneath my shoes. The sounds rippling through the air, the subtle rustle of leaves, distant birdsong, seemed inviting rather than distracting. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel gratitude for these small moments. It wasn't about forcing happiness. It was about making space for awareness to permeate, restoring connection to the present without judgment or resistance. Later in the week, during a casual conversation with a trusted friend, I voiced this newfound awareness. She shared her own journey through emotional numbing, which often followed intense periods of anxiety. Her story revealed a delicate balance. Protection through emotional detachment can shield us temporarily, but ultimately deprives us of the food for the soul that feelings provide. It struck me how many of us unknowingly build walls around our hearts in attempts to endure hardship, only to find ourselves isolated in silence. This mutual revelation forged a deeper bond and emboldened me to explore ways to gently dismantle those barriers. Subsequently, I turned toward creative expression, a journal I had long neglected. Writing became a refuge where I could paint words without constraint, capturing fleeting emotions and complex moods with raw honesty. One evening, I wrote a fragment. Today, I am a river searching for its current beneath a stone's shadow. The metaphor revealed how stifled energy yearned for release and flow. Through this metaphorical language, I accessed nuances of feeling that had alighted below conscious awareness. The act of crafting imagery became a bridge from silent numbness toward vivid self-recognition. A breakthrough crystallized when I consciously reintroduced physical rituals that evoked a sense of embodiment. I began practicing slow, intentional yoga sequences designed to awaken gentle awareness of the body's inner landscape. Each stretch and breath attuned me to sensations often overshadowed by mental chatter, the subtle warmth radiating from muscles, the ebb and flow of oxygen fueling life. In one session, I found myself lingering on the sensation of rootedness through my feet pressed firmly into the mat, a grounding confidence seldom experienced lately. This embodiment practice shifted the relationship with my interior world. I moved from dissociation toward embodied presence, cultivating a softer, kinder relationship with my sensations. Adding to this, I discovered the subtle yet profound rejuvenation found in ritualizing moments of stillness. I carved out time in early mornings to sit quietly with a cup of tea, focusing on the warmth seeping through porcelain to my hands, the aroma unfolding gently into the air. These pauses became sanctuaries, deliberate acts of self-kindness that invited my system to slow, recalibrate, and open itself more fully to feeling again. In those quiet interludes, I allowed myself to experience a fragile tenderness, like the first thaw of ice after a long winter, hinting at renewal and rekindled emotional vitality. However, reconnecting to the emotional spectrum required patience and willingness to face discomfort. In one particularly vulnerable moment, tears welled up unbidden during an uplifting song, and I felt the complex weave of sadness intertwined with hope. Allowing myself to stay present with those feelings, without rushing for them to subside, reshaped my understanding of strength. It was not about suppressing or conquering emotions, but trusting their presence as authentic markers of living fully. These experiences revealed a softer courage, being willing to welcome the waves of feeling and ride their rhythms regardless of intensity. Through this evolving journey, I've come to appreciate that emotional connection is not a luxury, but a vital thread in the fabric of well-being. The numbness I once mistook for safety unveiled itself as a gap where life's vibrancy fled, and bridging that gap required embracing the uncertainty and richness of feeling itself. When we cultivate that openness, we unlock doors to deeper empathy, creativity, and resilience, not by eradicating distress, but by expanding our capacity to inhabit the full depth of our human experience. Now, imagine what might unfold when you begin to honor your own emotional landscape, not only recognizing distress, but also inviting softness, awareness, and sensation back into your everyday moments. Can you feel the possibility of reconnecting with the subtle whispers of joy, sorrow, and wonder as inseparable companions on your path? Such an invitation can transform the battle for control into a dance of acceptance, weaving together the threads of vulnerability and strength into a new story of wholeness. Reflecting on this journey so far, I recognize the delicate weaving of threads that has brought us to a quieter tension, a space alive with possibility, yet still shadowed by uncertainty. It feels like standing on the edge of a vast forest at dawn, the mist thick but thinning with each inhalation, the promise of sunlight just beyond the horizon. There's a sense that all the intricate paths we've navigated, the echoes of restless thoughts, the subtle stirrings within the body, the flickers of recognition and self-dialogue, have collectively opened a clearing where new perspectives can begin to breathe. In these moments of stillness, I sense how the internal landscape reshapes itself slowly, as though I am both traveler and cartographer mapping uncharted territory. The terrain is familiar yet altered. Familiar emotions and sensations converge with fresh realizations, challenging earlier assumptions, but also offering a more nuanced understanding of what's stirring beneath. It's as if layers of fog are lifting only to reveal intricate patterns etched deep into the earth. Patterns that speak of resilience born from coexistence rather than confrontation, of strength emerging from gentle attentiveness instead of force. I find myself pondering the way this internal dialogue unfolds, the silent conversations that have grown richer and more honest over time. There's a softening in the voice I use when speaking inwardly, a new rhythm replacing the old rapid-fire judgments. It's as though the mind is learning to listen with curiosity, tenderly questioning the origins of habits once taken for granted. In this evolving dance of awareness, I detect a movement away from resistance toward partnership. The parts of me once viewed as adversaries become collaborators, shaping a more compassionate narrative threaded with patience. The shifting landscape also reveals how space itself becomes an essential player. Space not just in the physical sense, but emotional and mental expanses where tension can settle or dissolve harmlessly. I imagine these expanses like quiet lakes nestled within rugged highlands, places where turbulence can fade beneath the surface, reflections can catch light, and clarity seeps through. As these lakes form within, inviting stillness, the noise of relentless thought diminishes, allowing me to navigate the quieter currents beneath, those underpinnings that often guide without visible fanfare. With this new vantage point, the notion of control takes on different hues. Instead of grasping tightly or pushing away, there is a gentle steering, an embracing of flow that acknowledges the unpredictable shifts in mood and thought. Like a river carving its course over time, not always smooth, sometimes interrupted by rocks or bends, but persistent, adaptable, and ever moving toward broader waters. This metaphor resonates deeply as I feel the contours of my inner experience respond with similar fluidity, balancing tension and ease in ways I hadn't imagined possible. There is also an emerging awareness of connection, not just with myself, but with the wider web of shared human experience. I sense that this path is not walked in isolation, but woven through countless unseen threads of others' journeys, their courage and vulnerability mirroring my own. This intertwining creates a tapestry richer than any solitary thread could provide, strengthened by empathy, nurtured by belonging. The sense of shared struggle and resilience infuses my reflections with hope, a quiet conviction that transformation is both personal and collective. As I dwell in this in-between space, I feel both the gravity of past challenges and the subtle uplift of possibility. A tension exists between what was and what is becoming, like dawn's fragile light that holds promise yet still requires patience before full illumination. Within me, I hear a call, not urgent or commanding, but persistent, inviting me to step deeper, to embrace the unfolding with courage rooted in the awareness we have cultivated together. This moment is a threshold, a quiet pause pregnant with potential, poised to lead into the next chapter of emergence and reclamation. In the stillness, I remind myself that growth often unfolds in these unscripted interludes, where clarity is not a sudden revelation, but a gentle unfolding layered upon experience. The complexity and subtlety of what we've encountered create fertile ground for transformation, demanding a delicate balance of surrender and intention. As I prepare to take the next step, I carry forward the lessons etched by patient exploration and tender engagement, holding space for what will arise beyond this moment of pause. There was a moment, late one evening, when I sat by the window watching rain trace lazy patterns across the glass. The world outside blurred and shifted, droplets chasing one another in streams, unpredictable yet somehow rhythmic. In that quiet, watching nature's unhurried dance, I felt a long-running tension inside me begin to loosen ever so gently. It was as if the relentless storm within was finally admitted to rest, invited to release itself slowly and with grace. I realized something profound. The struggle I'd carried wasn't a battle to be won through forceful control, but a subtle art of surrendering to my own unfolding experience. In this pause, I glimpsed the richness waiting behind so many restless moments, a profound invitation to embrace imperfection, uncertainty, and the vast spectrum of feeling that colors our days. I saw how my fears, doubts, and hesitations had also been messengers, quietly urging me toward deeper understanding and alignment with myself. This shift illuminated a powerful truth. Resilience is forged not in the absence of discomfort, but in the willingness to face it tenderly and with openness. Each breath, each heartbeat became a thread weaving together pieces of myself I had long pushed aside. Walking through that realization, I recognized how much strength lives in allowing vulnerability to coexist with courage. I remembered conversations where I dared to voice my fragility and discovered that authenticity created unexpected bridges between isolation and belonging. It no longer felt like weakness to admit when I was overwhelmed or unsure. Instead, it became a doorway to connection and healing. This taught me that the narrative we tell ourselves about our struggles matters deeply. It either confines us in silence or empowers us to seek light amid shadows. As nights turned into days, I found beauty in small, quiet rituals that honored my pace and presence. A soft cup of tea held between my hands, the gentle stretch of morning light through curtains, a whispered song that held fragments of hope. These moments carved sanctuaries within ordinary life. They reminded me that peace is not a distant goal, but a living experience, accessible in each mindful instant when I choose to meet myself with kindness. This subtle reorientation transformed my relationship with discomfort from resistance to curiosity, from fear to respectful inquiry. I began to see my inner world as a complex landscape, where peaks of tension and valleys of calm intertwined in a dynamic, ongoing dance. What once felt like insurmountable walls shifted into textured terrain I could navigate, learn from, and inhabit fully. The journey evolved from escaping shadows to befriending them, learning their contours, listening to their stories, and discovering the wisdom they concealed. This reimagining gave rise to a new kind of freedom, a gentle sovereignty that comes from knowing oneself deeply, with patience and grace. One afternoon, while sharing my reflections with someone close, I voiced a simple but weighty insight. Healing is not a destination, but a continuous unfolding, a mosaic built from countless small choices and moments of attention. This conversation lingered with me, a reminder that progress often hides in what feels ordinary or incremental, and that rushing toward change only obscures the richness beneath. Sometimes, the bravest act is to simply be present, to honor all that arises without clutching or pushing away. If you find your own breath catching, or a restless tension stirring without clear cause, remember this invitation. Your experience holds meaning beyond discomfort. It is a sacred opening into deeper self-awareness and compassion. I encourage you to welcome these moments, not as adversaries to be defeated, but as teachers guiding you toward wholeness. In doing so, you honor the resilience inherent in your story, a resilience that thrives in the space between vulnerability and strength. Together, if we lean into this unfolding with openness, we discover a wellspring of quiet power, one that roots us firmly in our truth and lights a path forward. There is courage in simply arriving where we are, and grace in each breath we choose to take fully. This journey isn't defined by erasure of fear, but by a growing capacity to hold it alongside hope, carving space for genuine peace to emerge from within.